Welcome to Granny's Legacy Patterns. Today we are going to do a tutorial on crazy stitching, and we'll also show our tricks and our little bag of tricks, I guess you could say, that will help you do some marking with your crazy stitching. We have developed this method. It's simple, super simple, and it makes the stitching look so perfect and even. So I've got a little sampler that we made up. It's just a prototype, but by using our method, you can see how all the stitches are perfectly straight, they're perfectly aligned, and we'll get started and show you how to do this marking. So I have just used a bunch of scraps and made a little sampler here. In your bag, we will have the little canvas marking tool, a general chalk pencil, and we have found that this seems to work the best for marking through the canvas. There's other marking tools too, but for some reason this one you can put enough pressure on to get it marked out. This is our favorite crazy stitching book. It has some great examples to look at, some suggestions for threads and ribbons, metallic threads and embellishments. It's just such a wonderful book, but not only does it give you some samples, it shows you some different additions, embellishments you can add on, and it has some really nice basic stitches in here, how to do them, and then you can compound them and make them into really cool crazy stitching. So this book is included in our crazy stitch bag. Also a sharpener for your pencil. You'll want a really good sharpener, and then some little bead jars, and I've added the beads to here, but I think there's 4 bead jars in each bag. So that will give you a great start on your crazy stitching. So now on to marking. So I've just made up this little sampler, and sometimes I go along and I'll do a little whip stitch along the edge or applique stitch with matching thread, but right now we're gonna just work on getting a method of transfer. So if I want to embroider on this long straight edge, with the Lap app, I've put a wool mat on the back, so I have a place to pin. And let's see, I'll work upside down so you can see how this is. So I will kind of line up one of these with my straight edge here. So I'm lining that up with this edge. So I will start on one side. I usually don't start in the middle. And I'm trying to line up one row of this grid with the edge of this blue. And then I'll take, and I usually like to go every other square. And you don't have to pin it, but I have found once I get started making my dots, if I have a pin to go by, it works so much better, and it keeps it in place so that I can use both hands for marking. So I go along and I put lots of pins in, one in every other square if that's the method I'm gonna. Some things you might want to use every square, some things you want to do every 3rd square. So wherever I'm going to mark is where I put a pin, so that'll keep me in order. And then I sharpen my pencil good and sharp, and I start my marking. So here's my pin, so I'm gonna go and just do a little straight up and down circular method in each of the squares next to my pin. So and it takes a little practice to see how far apart you need your stitches. I have found every other square is a nice size that I like. Sometimes I use every 3rd square. And I'll even go back and show you one I used every single square. And you can always add more squares than you think you'll need and come back, and just not use them too. So you can't mark too many squares. So you just keep pushing down, and the more you push, the more, and it's kind of tricky. Sometimes if you push too hard and twist too much, you'll break your lead, but I'm going to mark even more just so you can just see a grid work. And as you get going, oh, see, this is why you use the pins, because it's nice to have that. You can double check to make sure you didn't get off one. And then you can move your because this won't go the whole entire length. But I'll pull these pins out of the way. And you can kind of lift it up to make sure you pushed hard enough too before you take all your pins out. But then you can move your canvas down. Just go over 2 of the dots that you have, or 4 of the dots sometimes is nice. I hope the camera is picking this up. And then I go back, and the same thing as I did before, I want to make sure I put a pin everywhere I want to mark. So this takes a little bit of time, but it's worth the effort to just keep going. So I won't go the whole way. I'll just mark a couple more so you can see how that went. So I'm using every other square for this marking. Now, sometimes you might need to do every square, sometimes every 3rd square, sometimes on this row. And this is another trick. If on this row I did every here, the next row I might want to go in the middle of each one. So then I put another set of pins so I know where I'm going. So there's the marking. And now you're ready to do your stitching. And I'll do a couple different marks here on the dark blue so you can see. So if I did every other on this row and the next row in between, it gives you a nice pattern too for embroidery. So you can do some creative marking for whichever embroidery stitch. See the little markings you get there? Does that show on camera? And sometimes you'd like to just do squares, and I'll show you some different places that I've marked. And so if I did a square, and I'm not taking the time to do the pins, and so I've got a square gridded out, but you can use this to grid out so many different things. And sometimes I'll even stitch, and I'll decide I want to add a stitch in between the beads, or between the dots, and you can actually be able to eyeball that then. So I'm going to show you a couple of the stitching methods I've used here on this sampler. So this one was the big like this. So you can go all the way across and then come back, and or you can play around. This is in every single square, and then I went high, you know, I did dots in every single square and made it high, low, high, low. This, of course, no, the fly stitch, I think it's the fly stitch, and then I went back and added a lazy daisy on each side. So you can see this was created by, it would have had to have a dot in between here. I would have had to do this method here. So you can go, I'll draw it here. So you stitch, stitch, down, stitch, stitch, down. So you can see by doing more dots, you can make your stitching stitch, stitch, down, stitch, stitch, down. So you can see how I marked that. But by playing around with the grid, you can come up with some really creative layouts for your design work. And here, you could even, if I'd have done the dot right in the middle here, I could have done X, X, all the way across, and then come back and put my bead right where it crossed. So the plastic canvas tool, the chalk pencil, and sharpener are really your friends with crazy stitching. So thank you for joining us today. I hope this explains some tricks of the trade for doing crazy stitching in a precise pattern. Thank you.